Hello everyone, I'm the Saxy Gamer, and today we're here to talk about all of the problems that I have with Civ 7. And I'm sure I'll give this video some sort of inflammatory title like Fixing All of the Problems in Civ 7, or Everything I Hate About Civ 7, or something ridiculous like that. But in this video, what we're really going to do is lay out all of the major problems that I have with Civ 7, talk about why I think they're problems, and then talk about some potential solutions. I'm not going to have a solution to every problem that I have with this game, but for some of them I think I have some ideas that at least, could help improve things. And the point of this video is not just to bash on Civ 7 and complain, but actually to talk about it in a sort of constructive way, to talk about the things that I really think are fundamentally broken with the game and how they can be improved. Because at the end of the day, I mean, as much as I love to complain about Civ 7, I swear, like, my last 5 videos that I've made are me complaining about Civ 7. As much as I love to complain about it, I also do really want this game to do well. I want it to be a good game, and I want it to succeed, because at the end of the day, we're all Civ fans, we all love Civ, and having a good Civ game is something that gives us a lot of enjoyment. So I hope that someday this game can get to the point where I can, gladly say that it is good. So without further ado, sit back, get comfortable, because we're going to be here for a while, and let's get right on into talking about the problems with Civ 7. And I'm going to get out the quick ones real fast out of the way, just because I'd like to spend most of the time talking about some of the more in-depth ones. But to start off, one of the ones, everyone has beaten this one to death. Before the game even came out, people were complaining about the UI. The UI still sucks, it's bland, it's uninteresting, doesn't have enough information, and just to kind of show what I'm talking about here, the perfect example of this, I think, is the government policy screen in Civ 7 versus the policy cards screen in Civ 6. If you take a look at the government policies card screen in Civ 7, you get gray rectangles on the left, 4 arrows for some reason, gray rectangles on the right. You just click and then they just magically appear on the other side. Very little color going on here. Whereas if you take a look at the policy card screen in Civ 6, you have red for your militaristic policies, gold for your economic ones, green for your diplomatic ones, and then purple for your wildcard slots. Those slots on the left show you exactly how many slots you have to fit cards. You can easily relate them to the cards on the right that show you, what things are. In your mind, when you look at this, if you're thinking, okay, I want something to help my military, boom, you just look for red. If you think I want something to help my yields or economy, boom, you look for yellow. It's right there at a glance. It's so easy to understand. You can click and drag things over. It just works really nice. I'm not sure why also they hate click and drag in Civ 7. On this screen, you click things and they just magically appear. I think this is my best estimation, is that because of the fact that this game launched on PC and consoles at the same time, they had to make a UI that worked on both PC and consoles, and I think that's a large reason why it's so bad, because they had to make something that, is kind of trying to compromise between something that works on PC and something that works on consoles. Instead, you end up with this stuff that just doesn't make any sense and looks like garbage. UI needs more color, more information, more proper structure. It needs a lot of work, but as I mentioned, everybody has beat this issue to death already, so I'm not going to talk about it any further. The other thing that I will complain about very fast is DLC. They sold this game, which is a half-finished, half-baked game, with $60 of DLC before it even launched. It came out on day one. You could spend an additional $60 for a small amount of liters and civs on a game that is not finished. It's insulting to the community to do that. The fact that every time I mention this, people still, someone in the comment will say, oh, but you should support the devs, it funds further development, it funds further this. If you go to a restaurant and you order a cake and they give you like a bowl full of batter and you're like, excuse me, this is not baked, and then they say, well, would you like strawberries for $5.99? It doesn't do you any good if the cake isn't baked. Nobody would go in that situation and say, well, we need to buy the strawberries because we need to support the chef so that way they can finish baking the cake. It makes no sense. It's their responsibility as a game studio to deliver a finished product before they sell additional stuff on top of it. So that's my soapbox there. That one makes me mad because every time I complain about it, people still defend it, but the DLC practices for this game are disgusting. The fact that they are selling DLC that costs almost as much as the base game for a small amount of content on a half-baked release is ridiculous. So I really hope that they're able to polish this game up a lot before they even think about releasing a large DLC pack. Now with those two quick ones out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about one of the more in-depth ones, and I'm just going to start off here with the Crisis system, because the Crisis system is one of the core mechanics of Civ 7 that they kind of sold this one quite a bit whenever they announced the game. It was supposed to be, one of the things that makes the game really dynamic and fun, and I think the way that it turned out has been quite opposite. I think it's quite underbaked and unfun, and I'm really not a fan of the current implementation. I'm not necessarily opposed to the idea as a whole, but the current implementation of the crisis system is just punishing, and it's not really very interactive. At the end of the day, really all that you're doing here is you get a pop-up on the screen and you choose a policy to slot in to punish yourself in some way. It really doesn't leave any room for fun problem solving. It just feels like you're punishing yourself and not that you're dealing with an actual crisis. And, I mean, a lot of people have been vocal in their complaints about the crisis system, and what the devs are doing right now are leading towards, making crises optional and just allowing you to essentially turn them off before you even start the game. But in my head, this is kind of stupid because it's one of the main features of the game. It's one of the things you're supposed to be able to have fun with and deal with in the game. So I would much rather it be improved rather than removed from the game. And for this one, I do have some ideas on how this can be fixed, and the main thing here revolves around making these more interactive, less of just, click a policy and then, click next turn 35 times until the next screen comes up to pick another policy, but rather actually giving you something to do, making these much more interactive and something that's actually fun and less outright punishing. Like, I want it to be something that's not just punishing, but something that you can feasibly deal with. And I've got 3 ideas kind of maybe for the different eras or something like that. So imagine that there's a crisis where there's something like a rebel uprising where maybe these rebel, essentially barbarian camps really from Civ 6, where these rebel strongholds spawn around the map. You have to fight some units, and maybe if you have enough military, you can squash the rebels and end the crisis early, or if you didn't build a military, you weren't planning on it, maybe it gets out of control, they get more powerful, they can take one of your cities. Maybe you could even add some additional options here where if you're playing an economic game, maybe you can pay off the rebels and have them go attack someone else or just not attack you. So there would be multiple ways to solve it. You could attack the rebels early and, get rid of them. You could just try to defend yourself. You could try to pay them off. You could even try to use them to, harm someone else. So much more strategic depth than just slotting in, a policy card that gives you -5 happiness. Like, it'd be way more fun. Another one I have in terms of ideas for this, maybe there's a plague where you need to build medical buildings in your cities, maybe train plague doctors or, maybe real doctors, depending on the era that this is placed into, and then have them go around your cities and towns to cure the disease. Once again, something where you actually have to do something interactive on the map. You have to build something in your cities. There's a unit involved with it that you have to move around. Maybe he does something, maybe just in your cities and towns, maybe elsewhere. Maybe you could even do something where you intentionally spread the plague to other people. Just something that's a lot more interactive and fun to deal with. The last idea I have, specifically for the exploration age, is maybe there's a pirate invasion where a bunch of pirates spawn in the ocean and you need to protect your treasure fleets and coastal settlements because they'll raid your coastal settlements, they'll raid your treasure fleets, things like this where there's actually things you have to do. If you didn't have a navy, you're like, oh shoot, I gotta build a navy because everything's gonna get wrecked by pirates if I don't. That's actually fun rather than just slotting in a policy that says, oh, now you will get -5 gold on your coastal settlements. Yeah, those are just some ideas. I would hope that there would be, a lot more options than just these 3 that I gave, but some things like that are interactive, that actually have choices, that actually have things that you actually have to deal with and are interactive rather than the system that there is now. I think with a system like that, I think the crisis system could actually be really fun and something that is actually enjoyable to deal with rather than what's in the game right now. But yeah, feel free to let me know your thoughts on the crisis system and how you think it can be improved. Next up on my list of problems, and this is one that I know for a fact they're working on it because they mentioned it in the last patch notes video, but map generation. The map generation in this game is entirely too predictable, especially if you play on Continents Plus. I can close my eyes and draw you exactly what the map will look like because it looks the same in essentially every game. You have one big continent, a row of islands, another big continent, a row of islands, and then you're back at the first continent. And it's like that every single game. They're basically almost always just big rectangles with a bunch of, 4 or 5, whatever, larger islands, a bunch of tiny ones in between. It's extremely predictable, and it makes it way less fun to explore because you basically just need to find, all right, where am I on my island? I know there's going to be this many people on my island, this many people on the other island. It's just, after you play like 2 or 3 games of it, every single game feels the same because of this map generation. I think personally, I think Civ 5 had some of the best map generation. Sometimes there needs to be some level of randomness in maybe there's 2 continents, maybe there's 3, maybe there's 4, maybe there's 5 of varying sizes. Maybe there's 1 big one, 2 small ones, and then some islands. Maybe there's, 2 medium-sized ones, 1 small one, and a lot of islands. Like, some degree of randomness is very fun because it would make the game a lot less predictable. The challenge here, though, is, they have this distant lands mechanic that kind of works with, I guess, particularly with the economic victory. So they'd have to figure out how they can deal with the distant lands thing. I mean, I don't think it's really that difficult of a thing to solve, because you can just, any continent aside from the one that you started on, or, maybe I should say any landmass aside from the one that you started on, can be distant lands. It doesn't, right now the distant lands are essentially just any islands in the middle or not your starting continent. They would have to figure out exactly how to work it in with the distant lands mechanics, but I'm sure that they can figure out something to deal with it. The other big complaint I have with map generation is that it feels like all the various terrain in the game just kind of feels the same in terms of yields. In Civ 6, I feel like Civ 6 had a very big distinction of, if you settle in a desert, your city's going to suck because you're not going to get anything out of it unless you're playing a specific Civ, or maybe you build a specific wonder like Petra that gives you yields, whereas other things are much better. If you see like a river and hills and grassland all in one city spot, you're like, oh my god, this is going to be incredible. There's, food, there's production, there's everything I want. In Civ 7, there's just no excitement from the map generation. I feel like everything is just like, a little bit of food, a little bit of production, whatever. Desert, grassland, plains, tundra, it's all just kind of the same, and it removes a lot of the fun. It does admittedly make the game a lot more balanced. It's a lot less, reliant on your starting position, but it also makes the game a lot less fun. So I would like to see some more variation in the map generation in terms of the terrain that you get and the yields that you get from the terrain. I guess interacting with the terrain, I'll talk about it in a little bit as well with another one of the problems, but interacting with the terrain, I feel like, is something that is a lot less fleshed out in Civ 7 because everything just kind of feels the same. Like, you might as well just make everything flat grassland because it doesn't really feel that different in what we have right now. But yeah, so to summarize my map requests, more variety in map generation, more unpredictability, more interesting continents and shapes and orientations and things like that is one request, and then also better interaction with the map, more variety in terrain yields, and reasons to actually settle in different types of terrain, I think would be very good. Alright, moving on. Next up, we have urban sprawl and buildings in general in Civ 7. So, in my mind, buildings in Civ 7 really just do not feel very rewarding, and it often feels like, as I mentioned, one map location is not substantially better or worse than the other one, and a building, no matter where you place it, there's not really much of a difference. Yeah, this really, for me, it takes away a lot of the fun because there's a lot less excitement in exploring and finding a great spot to settle. Because with that, in Civ 6, the district yields were very dependent on location. Like, if you find a spot where you get like a +5 campus because there's a lot of mountains, it was exciting, and then, you feel like you have to go settle that, or maybe if somebody else is there, you're like, oh, I want to take that from them because it's good. But in Civ 7, it's really just not there. The building adjacency it feels quite bland, honestly. There's very few instances where I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to be an incredible spot for a library or this or that, and it's gonna make everything, so much, but I have to settle here and get this adjacency. The other thing, multiple buildings also have the same adjacency requirements, and I get why they did this because of the fact that there's quarters, you can put 2 buildings on a single tile, but in the end, it just kind of makes it feel like everything just has these minor little bonuses. There's not really any super major ones. And it just feels like you're kind of doing the same thing over and over again. To make this much worse, I feel like in the later eras, especially the later ages, buildings become incredibly bland because you typically just end up building the higher tiered buildings over the outdated ones. You don't really have to even think of where to place them because you probably, like, if you have a great spot for a science building, you probably placed it in the antiquity age, so once you get to the modern age, you're just going to build over it. Or, maybe even in the exploration age, you're going to build over it once, and then in the modern age, you're just going to build over it again. There's no thinking required, there's no decision making required. So I feel like, yeah, the problem gets way worse as you get later on into the game. The other thing is I often find myself just building any building that's available because I have nothing else to do, and that's something that I'll talk about in the next problem. And yeah, there's also just very little choice making because in most eras you can typically build every single building in a city. You don't really have to make many choices of, I'd rather build this building than that building. Within a certain age, you typically are able to build at least almost every single building. Maybe the requirement might even be space because you run out of space to put them. So in terms of this, I feel like the production cost and pacing of buildings might need to be adjusted a little bit. The fact that I'm just kind of building every single building in every game, everything's just sprawling out. I don't really have to think about the adjacencies because they're just kind of minor adjacencies. I feel like it really removes a lot of the fun from doing the buildings, and at the end of the day, you just end up with this big gray blob of a city where the other major problem with, the districts, the buildings, and the urban sprawl is that the visuals are very hard to read for buildings. It's almost impossible to take a look at a city and at a glance understand what anything is. Like, this was a huge strong point in Civ 6 because in Civ 6, everything was so strongly color-coded that you look at a city, you can immediately identify where a campus is, where a theater square is. In Civ 7, everything typically just looks like gray. This leads to very little readability and understanding of what you already have in your cities. And this especially becomes a problem in the age transition, which I'll talk about in the age transition part of this video. But, whenever it's time to start overbuilding stuff, I often forget where everything even is anyways, and the readability makes it much harder to understand what is actually going on and where it is. I unfortunately don't have a great solution to, my issues with buildings as a whole. But in general, to me, the buildings and districts feel like they need to feel more rewarding. They need to feel more dynamic throughout the game. And I feel like it should be more than just mindlessly placing down as many buildings as I can. All right, now we're going to get into what I think is, at least for me, one of the largest and biggest problems with Civ 7, and that is general lack of strategic depth and things to do. So this game, to me, has been a bit of a victim of optimizing the fun out of the experience. And the example that I'll give for this is the removal of builders. So whenever they were talking about this game, they said, people don't like managing builders. It's annoying. So they removed builders. But let's take a look and think about what that in turn has removed from the game in terms of your options for what you can do in a turn. So now you can't build a builder. So, all right, that's one less unit you can produce. So you don't have the choice to build a builder. You now no longer have the choice then to build a tile improvement in a turn. Now, instead, you just improve tiles only on turns when your population grows. So on most turns, you don't even have the option of building a tile improvement. This, also the removal of builders, means that you don't have the option to chop forests to boost production. You also don't have the option to buy tiles with gold. You also don't have the option to manage your citizens and choose which tiles to work. You also don't have the option to build more culture buildings if you want to make your borders expand faster. So removing builders was meant to streamline the experience, but it's essentially removed all of the actions revolving around interacting with the land. So it's part of my, linked with that complaint about interacting with the land, getting rid of the builders was, it was an optimization thing because now you don't have to manage them. But okay, if you're not managing builders, what are you doing? You're clicking next turn is what it ends up being. So this has happened not only with builders, but with a ton of other systems in the game because they've done things. I'll talk about it, especially with towns as well. They've done things to optimize the experience, but at the end of the day, it just ends up being a boring experience because there's not much to do. There are no governors, so you can't promote a governor and assign a governor on a turn. There are no great people, so you can't watch the great people list and then, try to rush a great person or buy one with gold or anything like that. You can't make any trade deals in diplomacy. Sure, you can click the thing that says, do one of your, I can't even remember what the name of it is, but, offer one of the things that gives everybody yields. You can click that, but once again, not really any thinking there. You just click it and they either accept it or they deny it. For me, in a game of Civ 7, it feels like oftentimes the only things to do on a turn are, move/build/buy units, build or buy buildings, or place a rural district if a settlement has grown. And there's just so much less depth in terms of the options for what you can do on a turn in Civ 7. And this for me is honestly the biggest thing because after a while, whenever I play Civ 7, I struggle to even finish the Antiquity Age because by the end of the Antiquity Age, I'm just building random buildings, building random units because I have nothing else to do. Also, speaking of strategic depth, the government system in Civ 7 is far inferior to the governments and policy cards in Civ 6 because the Civ 6 ones actually had meaningful choices and strong bonuses. In Civ 6, picking your government meant that you would influence which policy card slots you got. And the policy cards in Civ 6 were quite strong, so you actually wanted to think about which one you wanted because, if you get more economic policy card slots, that would be really strong, or, depending if you're playing a militaristic game, maybe you really want to have more military card slots. actually a meaningful choice. In Civ 7, the government's choices are just like you click it, and then every few turns, whenever you get a celebration or whatever they're called, you get a random, not a random bonus, but like you get some minor percentage-based bonus to something. It's not very fun. And then the policies are just like, you just pick a few, like some of them are okay, but like not that many of them. You just pick a few, and then you kind of forget about them half the time because they're just kind of sitting there. There's not a ton of thought. There's not as much thought going into the government system there. So once again, just another system in Civ 7 that has a lot more depth and a lot less thinking than what was available in Civ 6. Kind of along these lines, victory conditions feel very bland. I'll point to the economic one especially as an example of a very bland economic condition. I mean, so in the exploration age, the treasure fleets require essentially no strategy. You settle in distant lands, you get one of the resources, you wait a few turns, you click the guy, send him back to your home continent, and then you just wait until he's there, and then once he's there, you unload him, and you wait till another one spawns. It's mostly like next turn simulator. In the modern age for economic victory, you grab some resources, maybe you even have them already, you build some factories, and then you just spam next turn until you get enough points, you get the Great Banker, and you literally just click him between capital cities, and you wait in between turns. It's all extremely hands-off and really boring gameplay. It just makes me not want to finish any games because I'm like, oh man, I just have to wait like 20 turns for me to get enough points from these treasure fleets or anything like that. There's nothing I'm really like trying to do. It's just waiting. Military gameplay as well is kind of a slog and feels really unit spammy. I think the multiple walls in a city kind of exacerbate this problem because enemies can just kind of put a bunch of units in their cities and you just have to wait and slog them out. I think that there needs to be some sort of additional sieging mechanic or something in Civ 7 to add something other than just like, throw units until you win. The other thing that I think has really hurt the strategic depth of military gameplay in this game is that strategic resources are not really a thing anymore. I mean, iron and horses and stuff exist in the game, but they just give you a little bit of extra combat strength. You don't need them to build units. This then removes the aspect of, you don't need to, if I'm playing Mongolia, I don't even need to go settle and find horses, find and settle horses because I can build horse units with or without them. It doesn't really make that much of a difference. So it kind of removes that drive to explore the map and then find them, settle them, or take them from someone else. Or if I'm fighting someone, I'm like, I have to take this city because I have to cut off all of their, iron or something like that. The strategic resource changes are just another thing that, once again, just a little bit of strategic depth that's lost in Civ 7, where once you combine all of these things, especially, no longer having any builders, there aren't any governors, the government system in general is kind of shallow, the military combat is shallow, the victory conditions are fairly shallow. You combine all these things together, and then you end up with a case where it just feels like there's not that much to do in a game of Civ 7. And every time I play this game, as of late, I find myself being bored because I just want to click next turn. I mean, 4X in this case stands for explore and then next turn, next turn, next turn. It's just, it needs a lot more strategic depth to be really actually like engaging and fun in my opinion. Continuing on with the whole lack of strategic depth and things like that, I want to talk about towns as, their own dedicated segment because, I mean, towns are very much linked to the lack of things to do problem and once again, kind of the optimizing the fun out of the experience problem. So the addition of towns in Civ 7 was meant to remove the need to manage a bunch of production queues in the late game. The only problem is that instead of doing that, it's kind of removed the option to do, manage production queues from the early game when I actually want to be building and managing things. Because of the fact that everything starts as a town and you need to upgrade it into a city, it means that a lot of the times, unless you have like a ton of gold in the early game, you need to wait at least, quite a few turns before you're able to upgrade anything into a city. So you end up with a lot of towns that once you settle a town, it's essentially entirely hands-off. The only thing you need to do is expand a rural district whenever it grows in population. So this kind of, really feeds into the lack of things to do and the lack of depth that you get in Civ 7. The other thing that I think is really a problem for towns is that towns and their specialties in general just feel very unrewarding. I never really have an instance where like I find a spot and just think to myself, wow, this is going to be like so awesome if I put a town here. I'll get great bonuses. It's going to be incredible. Instead, I just kind of settle for the sake of settling and then wait until I can convert to a city or, just forget about changing the town off of growing focus or pick a specialty because I'm annoyed at the notification. I'm never like, I really want to change this specialty because it's going to be so good. I think that the specialties just need a total like revisit and think of ways to make them actually good. I mean, right now, maybe I really don't know. Maybe the problem is that since all the production just gets converted into gold, it's just kind of like, maybe in my head, I don't understand where you're supposed to get other yields from in the town. So like all you're really getting is gold and maybe some food if you pick a specialization. Or, I mean, some of the specializations give a little bit of other bonuses, but it's not really that huge. So yeah, I really think that the town specialties really need another revisit, because it's a mechanic that I think in my head it has the potential to be really good, and it has the potential to, you know, actually be fun to use and make the game less tedious, but right now I think it's kind of too hands-off. And right now, whenever you're just getting all these towns, there's just nothing to do. I think that they need more impactful specializations. You know, once again, interaction with the terrain, I think, is something that could maybe help out towns as well if there's actually some reason to settle them in specific places. The other thing I'll say about this is kind of also linked to the UI issues. I think that the UI can be improved to help understand exactly what I'm getting from a town, like such as where is the food being sent, what other yields am I getting, maybe some things where, you know, on the town specialization thing, it tells you how many yields you'll get from picking a specialization. You know, if there's one that gives you science, it should tell you how much science you're going to get from that specialization. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they need different specializations aside from just giving some random yield bonus. But so towns are one where I don't really have a perfect solution in my head for how they need fixed. I feel that they need fixed, and I really hope that the devs can come up with something that can make these a little bit more interactive without being, you know, micromanagey, and just make them feel a little bit more rewarding to use. All right, now on to another problem that I know a lot of people have a big problem with as well, and that is the age transitions. In my mind right now, the age transitions just feel extremely jarring, and I think a lot of this is due to UI clarity. For me, it's very confusing when you end one age and start the next, only to have like everybody's yields totally changed with very little explanation of where yields are coming from now, because you can be like dominating in science in the antiquity age, and then you enter the exploration age and suddenly you're not even close to first place. You're like, where did all my yields go? Why did this guy's yields not drop as much as mine? It's very confusing also to be able to understand if you should be building over outdated buildings or building new buildings in different spots, because the game does a very poor job of helping you understand what you gain or lose by doing this, because outdated buildings still provide you yields, but they're just like reduced yields compared to what you were getting in the original age when you built them. So in some cases, it's more beneficial not to build over them, but to build a new science. Let's just use a science building, for example. It's beneficial not to build a science building over an old one, but to build a new one like somewhere else. But the game right now makes it very confusing to understand whether or not you should be doing this. Like, should you be building over or should you be building new? There's not a great, clear explanation of like what buildings are outdated, what are you still getting from them, how much are they costing you. Things like that could really help the age transition, because right now, man, when you go to the next age, everything just feels like it gets all shaken up, but not in a way that's like clear and understandable, in a way that just makes no sense. My other big problem is like militarily, the transition really sucks, because I mean, I've probably said this at least 2 times already, but you can have an advantage in at the end of one age. You can be like literally 1 turn away from taking someone's city, and then once you advance to the age, all of your momentum is immediately killed. You're back to having the exact same units as your enemy. Now you're at peace with them, all of your units are kicked out of their territory, and you basically have to start the war all over again from scratch. It kills any momentum that you had, and for me it's incredibly frustrating and unfun, because all of like the things that you are essentially rewarded for doing well in the antiquity age, they're just immediately wiped out when you go to the exploration age. Like if you had a unit advantage because you were superior in technology, it's gone. And then, you know, maybe because of the buildings becoming outdated, maybe you don't even have the science advantage anymore. And you're like, what the heck? How did this happen? Like I was doing really well. Some of these really jarring things, I think that there should be something that they can do to kind of help alleviate these some. I feel like the age transition is just so like immediate right now. I wish that there was some way to make it more gradual, rather than, you know, just immediately ending up with a loading screen and then going from one age to the next. I wish that there was some sort of, you know, gradual way that this could happen. I don't know how that would happen, because that sounds complicated, but maybe the devs could think of something about this, because so the other problem I have with the ages is that, you know, a big point of the ages was to kind of keep people playing throughout the game, to give you, you know, like small incremental challenges to deal with. But what I find it's done actually instead is done the opposite. People want to play the Antiquity Age, and then they don't care about playing any age after that. And I think one of the reasons for this is because, you know, in Civ 7 or in Civ in general, and 4X games in general even on top of that, the late game has always been a challenge because it can be just kind of, you know, clicking next turn until the game ends because it's clear who's going to win and it's clear, you know, what the outcome is going to be. So the age system was kind of supposed to split that up a little bit and remove some of that because, you know, it shakes things up. Everything's not as clear. But what it's done instead, actually, it's kind of added like 2 additional endgame eras within the game, because once you get close to the end of an age, I really stop caring about what I do, because in 20 turns, everything's going to be totally changed anyways. You know, like, why would I start war with someone in the last 20 turns of an era? Because I know that in 20 turns, I'm going to have to make peace with them. All of my units are going to be kicked out. I'm going to have no advantage. Or, you know, why would I build more buildings at the end of the age? Because in 20 turns or whatever, you know, however many until the next age, everything's going to be shaken up. They're all going to be outdated again, and they're just going to cost a lot of maintenance and lose a bunch of their yields. So instead, in the middle of the game, you get all these periods where things kind of don't really matter because you're just waiting for the next age to change. And this makes things really boring during that period. You're kind of just pressing next turn, hoping that you can reach the end of the age and advance to the next one. One of my other big problems with the age system, and I mean, it was kind of the problem I had with the Crisis system as well, is that the devs can't seem to decide if they want to commit to the age transition system or get rid of it, because they're currently trying to appease both groups of people and are in turn pleasing none of them. It's very similar to the Crisis system. Like, Crises and Ages were 2 of the selling points and the main features of Civ 7, and throughout these updates, they're basically adding options. Like, they've added this continuity option to kind of change up some of the behavior of the age transition, where it's a little bit, you know, it's kind of smoothed out a little bit in terms of, you know, where your units are and stuff. But and in general, they're kind of just pushing things a little bit towards, like, you don't have to play the age transition if you don't want. But if you're not playing that, like, that's one of the major selling points of the game. At the end of the day, the people that like the age transitions aren't happy because, you know, the problems that they have with them aren't getting addressed. And the people that hate the age transitions also aren't happy because they're still in there, they're just a little bit different. So I really wish that the devs would, you know, kind of commit to one of these paths a little bit more. I really would like to see them make the age transition good, because Humankind's age transition system was not that great either. Nobody's really done it particularly well that I'm aware of, so honestly, I hope that they can do it well, because I would love to see somebody do it well, and I hope that they can do it. But right now, they're kind of playing this weird middleman game where nobody's really happy at the end of the day. Alright, one last thing to talk about in terms of the problems, and that is Immersion. And this one is kind of related to the age transition, and also the other thing it's related to is separating the leaders from civs, because these two things combined have really caused an immersion problem in Civ 7. It feels goofy and unserious every time I see some leader with some random civ that my brain does not associate them with. Like, if I'm playing a game and I see Ben Franklin, who's Ben Franklin the leader of? Oh yeah, of course, Greece. Like, whenever I see that, it feels unserious, and it takes me out of the experience. One of the really strong suits of Civ in general has been, you know, if I'm playing, I'll just say Spain, you feel like you're Spanish. Obviously not literally, like, I'm not going to go around speaking Spanish, but, you know, you got the Spanish guitar in the background, you have all your city names in Spanish, you're playing the Spanish leader with Spanish unique units, with Spanish this, Spanish that. Everything about it makes you feel like you're playing Spain, or America, or China, or any civ. But in Civ 7, you know, you can be playing some random leader with some random civ when you're like, wait, who am I again? Like, and who am I talking to? This guy, he's the leader of what civ? It's really caused an immersion problem. The age transitions also don't help this, because you suddenly go from one civ to the next, and there's no gradual transition. Like, you know, one turn you're like, all right, I'm playing as Greece, and the next turn you're like, oh, what the heck? I'm France. Like, where did this come from? I don't even remember if France is a exploration age civ in this game, but, you know, whatever. Throw in any two names there that are not really that related. You can be China in one age, and then, you know, suddenly you're playing as England. It just doesn't really make sense, and it really leads to an immersion problem. One of the other things that, this is once again something I've complained about a lot already, but the leader screen makes the immersion problem worse. The whole 2 leaders standing on each side of the screen, it makes it feel like I'm not the leader of my civ. It feels like I'm watching my leader instead. Where, as in previous civ games, you know, if you go talk to Montezuma, he's there talking to you, like looking at you, making gestures towards you, you know, obviously towards like the screen, but, you know, it feels like he's talking to you. But this whole like leaders on the side thing, it just feels like nobody's talking to you. You're just kind of watching everything happen. It takes away from the immersion of the game. And the thing is, I mean, like the art and the music and associated things with that they're all good. You know, obviously I've complained about the visuals in terms of readability, but in terms of like visual style and immersion and stuff, the visuals are great, the music's great, but I really struggle to feel connected with my civilization whenever I play a game, just because of all of these factors combined mean that it just feels like I'm just kind of confused about what's going on. I get random leaders with random civs, you know, sometimes they're vaguely related, but not always, but I get leaders I don't know with civs that I, you know, don't associate them with, and then they change every, you know, however many turns, and the combination of all these factors really kind of takes me out of the experience of playing a civ game. I mean, unfortunately, this one is kind of like at least partially a core problem with the game. The fact that leaders and civs are decoupled means that there's not really any going back on this, I think, at this point. But for Civ 8, whenever, you know, 10 years from now, whenever they design it, hopefully they consider this in mind, that like decoupling leaders and civs really does cause a bit of an immersion problem in the game. Anyways, I think I've talked enough, so I'll just kind of recap my thoughts here. And overall, right now, I feel like things feel very shallow and unrewarding in Civ 7, and unimmersive on top of that. I don't have the same excitement that I got from Civ 6 of, you know, planning out a beautiful district system with like big adjacencies, or finding an awesome city location with tons of great yields and district spots and good spots for tile improvements. I feel like I have very few things to do within a game and just find myself pressing next turn while I wait for something interesting to happen again. The game is really lacking a lot of deep and strategically interesting features, and it's going to need a lot of work to bring them in. Once again, I really hope that they can bring them in, but it's going to take a lot of work. The UI and the visuals are not intuitive, and they're not easy to understand. The game has immersion problems, and the age transitions generally feel fairly jarring. Part of the worst part of it all, at least in my opinion, is that the devs can't seem to decide if they want to totally stick to their original vision or change things to appease the fan base. I really want them to stick with their initial vision and improve upon it, because community feedback is good, but oftentimes the community doesn't entirely know what they want, or they just want the same thing that they've already gotten over and over again. That's why, you know, whenever Call of Duty releases Call of Duty 25 Modern Warfare 72, people still go crazy and they buy it because they just want to buy the same thing they've gotten over and over again. I don't want the same thing as what we've gotten before, but I want a different experience that is still good. So I hope that they don't, you know, totally abandon ship with some of these crisis system, you know, with the crisis system and the age transition. I hope that they put in the work and actually make those systems good, because I think with that, Civ 7 has the potential to still stand as a really, really good Civ game that's unique compared to the other Civ games, but it's going to take a lot of work to get there. Anyways, let me know what you think about the problems that we've talked about today. If you have any ideas for how they could be improved, hopefully someone from, you know, the Civ development team watches this, and, you know, if you ever want to discuss Civ 7, feel free to shoot me an email. My email is somewhere on my YouTube page if you want to reach out, and I'd be happy to talk about it. But yeah, hopefully someone at least from the Civ dev team can see this and consider some of these things. But once again, let me know what you think in the comment section below. But thank you everyone for watching. I have been the Saxy Gamer. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to like. If not, feel free to dislike. If you're looking for some more Civilization 7 content, feel free to subscribe. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.